Hi, everybody. So I chose to do my work for my seminar project on Indigenous authors, and the title of my work is Arguing Against Erasure, the Importance of Indigenous Authors. So I primarily looked at Zakala Shaw's work, School Days of an Indian Girl, and the big surrounding topic of her work is the boarding schools that Native Americans were forced to attend. So I wanted to cover a little bit of that here because it's something that I don't think is covered enough in history, and that's why I primarily did choose this work to study for the semester. The very first school that was created for the Native Americans was called the Carlisle Indian School. It was created in 1807 and operated for 39 years. This school was the template that all of the other schools were created around, and the last school didn't close until actually the 1960s. It created the ideology of kill the Indian, save the man, and the goal of these schools was to take away all the ties that Native American children had to their culture and their heritage and their families. I wanted to talk about what was taught in schools because it was very different than what white children were taught in schools. A quote from someone who actually attended one of them said, "It was a system that emphasized social class. Indian people were native but lower class, who white people thought should learn some good manual trades that benefited the white majority. The boarding schools were not really about benefiting Indians. They were a form of segregated education in the history of the United States." And in my essay, I talk about all of the different things that the students had to go through and how their culture was taken away from them. They were divided from their family. One of the things that they did there was their hair was forced to be cut, and she talks about how the importance of that in their culture. The missionaries who ran the schools didn't speak the same language as the students. Speaking their native language is prohibited. They were often beat and abused for using their own languages. And this created a divide at home when there were students who were trying to embrace their culture and their indigenous heritage, and then there were ones who were assimilating to what the missionaries wanted them to learn. And then I wanted to compare this to a work that was a lot more recent. So Sherman Alexie's book is published in 2007, and there's a scene within that book where they talk about the ideology that relates back to the one from the Carlisle Indian School. The teacher there says we're supposed to kill the Indian to save the child, and having knowledge of the Indian schools, this is something that somebody would be able to pick up on, which is why I think that having works by Indigenous authors is so important to keep in the classroom. And that was my thesis surrounding the majority of my work, is books such as Zakala Shaw's and Alexie's include important history, and the long-lasting effects of these boarding schools are at risk of being banned. I think a lot of us, considering we are English majors, know that book banning is at an all-time high. And in Florida, there's lessons that can be banned simply for anything that makes a student feel guilt or anguish for past actions committed by their race, anything that can be deemed as uncomfortable and inappropriate, and these books typically fall on the list, and this puts them at risk of being completely erased and people not knowing this history. And that's why I feel it is important for them to remain in the classroom. I'm going to turn it over to Lilia.